You're standing at the side of a mountain railroad grade somewhere in the American West. The main line curves away downhill through the canyon. But just before it does, there's a branch, a short spur of track that peels off to the right, points uphill, and ends in a deep bed of coarse gravel, maybe 500 feet later. No station, no signals, no crew, just track and gravel and a rusted sign that says, "Emergency siding." Most people drive past things like this their whole lives and never give them a second thought. But that short dead-end spur of track represents the final layer in a safety system that took 150 years, dozens of catastrophic accidents, and the work of some of the most practical engineers in American history to build. Today, we're going to break down exactly why that siding exists, what it takes to stop a runaway train, and why the fact that you've probably never thought about this is the whole point. The first thing you need to understand is the scale of what we're actually talking about. A modern freight train isn't just big. It's big in a way that has no real comparison in everyday life. A fully loaded intermodal train, the kind stacked 2 containers high that crosses the country every day, can stretch over a mile in length. It might pull 200 cars. At maximum load, total weight can exceed 15,000 tons. Put that on a mountain grade, and you have one of the most demanding problems in mechanical engineering. The grades in the American West aren't gentle. Cajon Pass in California, Raton Pass on the Colorado-New Mexico border, Tennessee Pass through the Rockies. Some of these descents drop 2, 3, even 4 feet for every 100 feet of track. That sounds small. Over 8 or 10 miles of continuous downhill, it is relentless. Gravity doesn't take breaks. It applies force constantly to every car, from the first mile to the last. And once a 15,000-ton train begins accelerating downhill, the kinetic energy building in that movement is almost beyond comprehension. Stopping it requires converting all of that energy into something else, primarily heat. And that is exactly what the braking system is designed to do. Here's how it actually works. Every freight car on an American railroad carries a reservoir of compressed air. Running the full length of the train is a pipe called the train line. When the engineer applies the brakes from the locomotive cab, pressure in that pipe drops. That pressure drop signals each car's brake cylinder to engage. Brake shoes clamp against the wheels. The train slows. What makes this system clever, genuinely clever, is that it is designed to fail in the safe direction. If the air line ruptures, if a coupling breaks, if any car separates from the train, the pressure drops automatically. The brakes apply on every car. The train cannot lose its braking through a simple mechanical failure without that failure triggering a stop. This was George Westinghouse's invention, patented in 1869. Before it, railroads used handbrakes. A brakeman rode each car and turned a wheel by hand when the engineer whistled. On a heavy train descending a mountain grade, the timing required between dozens of brakemen working in coordination was impractical. Accidents were constant. Westinghouse changed that completely. A single engineer, one brake valve, automatic action across every car in the train. But here is the problem that no amount of clever engineering fully solved. Friction generates heat. That is unavoidable. On a long mountain descent, the brakes may be partially applied for 10, 15, 20 continuous minutes. The brake shoes are pressing against steel wheels that are turning thousands of times per mile. The temperature in that contact zone climbs fast. At a certain point, and this is the critical issue, the heat overwhelms the system's ability to generate friction. The brake shoes crack. Metal components begin to lose their tolerance. In hydraulic systems, fluid can vaporize. The brakes are still mechanically engaged. They are simply no longer generating enough friction to matter. This is called the thermal fadeout, and it does not announce itself dramatically. Speed creeps up a mile per hour past where it should be. Then 2. The engineer applies more braking. The pressure readings look correct, but the train is not responding the way it should. And then comes the realization. Experienced engineers have described it as a cold, quiet feeling that the grade is winning. At that point, options narrow very fast. Emergency braking applies maximum pressure across the whole train. But if thermal fade is already advanced, that pressure has less and less effect. The train accelerates. The bottom of the grade is getting closer. This is not a theoretical scenario. It has happened dozens of times in the history of American railroading, on grades across the country, with consequences severe enough that they became the turning points in how the entire industry approached mountain operations. The worst runaway accidents share a recognizable pattern: a heavy train, a long grade, brakes that held through the first miles and stopped holding somewhere in the middle, a crew applying every available measure too late, and at the bottom, a town, a yard, a curve the train couldn't make at the speed it had reached. One of the most studied examples is the 1994 accident near Cajun Pass in California, where a Southern Pacific freight ran away after brake failure and derailed at high speed in the San Bernardino area, causing a fire that burned for days. The investigation found multiple contributing factors: worn brake rigging, improper setup before the descent, decisions made in good faith that compounded each other in the worst possible sequence. That accident and others like it forced a reckoning. The Federal Railroad Administration tightened inspection requirements. Brake testing protocols became more stringent, and the industry was reminded again that no single safety layer, however well designed, is sufficient on its own. Which brings us back to that gravel bed at the side of the mountain. The catch siding, also called an escape track, a safety track, or a runaway siding, is the last resort in the system, and its design is almost brutal, straightforward. It branches off the main line at a switch. That switch, in most installations, is normally lined toward the siding, not the main track. This is important. A runaway train doesn't need a crew member to throw a switch. It doesn't need a dispatcher to issue an instruction. The geometry of the track itself routes the train into the siding automatically. The siding points uphill. On a grade where gravity has been the enemy for the last 10 miles, the uphill angle becomes the first source of deceleration. The same energy that accelerated the train downhill now works against it on the way up. And at the end of the siding is the drag bed, coarse gravel, sometimes packed sand, sometimes a combination of both. A train entering at 50, 60, 70 miles per hour buries its wheels almost immediately. The resistance is enormous. Within a few hundred feet, a train that was completely out of control comes to a full stop. The train may be damaged. Cars may derail within the siding. Cargo is almost certainly lost. but the locomotive crew walks away. And the town at the bottom of the grade was never involved. That is the calculation built into every catch siding ever constructed. Not elegant, not sophisticated, just honest about what the last line of defense actually needs to do. There are things the catch siding cannot do. It cannot fix brake rigging that was improperly inspected. It cannot reverse the decision to put an overloaded train on a grade without adequate testing. It cannot add back the maintenance hours that were cut to meet a schedule. This is worth understanding, because the catch siding is sometimes treated as proof that the system works. And in one sense, it does. But it is also proof that the system has limits, and that the people who designed it understood those limits clearly enough to build a physical last resort directly into the infrastructure. The catch siding doesn't exist because engineers failed. It exists because engineers were honest. Honest about the physics. Honest about human error. Honest about the gap between how a system is designed to work and how it performs in the real world over decades of use. That honesty is what separates a mature safety system from one that is still learning its lessons. There is a broader principle here that applies well beyond railroads. What you are looking at with a catch siding, with any catch siding, anywhere on any mountain grade in the American West, is what engineers call defense in depth. The air brakes are one layer. Dynamic braking on the locomotive is another. Speed restrictions, track inspections, crew training, pre-departure brake tests, each of those is a layer. They overlap. They back each other up. They are designed so that no single failure and no single mistake can get all the way through. The catch siding is the last layer, the one that only activates when every other layer has failed. And its existence does not mean the other layers aren't working. It means the people who built this system understood something that took American industry a long time to learn. That the question is never whether something can fail. The question is what happens when it does. The catch sidings you can find today along the mountain grades of the West don't look like much. A short branch of track, a bed of gravel at the end, a faded sign, sometimes a camera mounted on a post in recent years to confirm switch position to the dispatcher. They sit through summer heat and winter snow. Most years, nothing uses them. Most years, the brakes hold. The crews make their descents without incident, and the sidings are just part of the scenery that goes past the window of a car on the highway below. But the railroad knows what they're there for, and on the grades where the tonnage is heaviest and the descent is steepest, you will find them, quiet, unremarkable, and completely ready. That is what serious infrastructure looks like. Not dramatic, not visible, just there, doing its job, waiting for a day it may never come. And if you've never thought about it before, that's exactly how it's supposed to be.